Hello fellow programmers, this is another video. We're continuing to make progress in this little app where we are creating the bank account. So in the previous videos we made the account class, presentation class, and most of the transaction class. We started to create the form logic when whatever button is being clicked, so we'll continue to do that. So let's go with the deposit. Now, well, here's the thing. When you go and you think about it, deposit and withdrawal were very similar. They work with one account. If it's check-in and you deposit to check-in or withdraw from check-in, the only difference is that one is adding money and the other one is taking away the money from the account. So what we can do is to actually have where it says handle button deposit click, we can also add the button withdrawal click, because we can use this we can just use one sub for both of those clicks. We just have to determine which button was clicked and then perform the appropriate transaction. So we need the trans type as string. I'll initialize it to nothing. We need the trans amount as double. We need the trans name as string, and that could be nothing as well. Initialize. No, I forgot dim. So and dim, like I said, we need to have a way of knowing which button was clicked, because obviously deposit and withdrawal, even though functionality is the same, similar, we need to know which one to actually do. So I'll do what text box, because where am I getting the data from? If it's deposit, I'm getting it from this text box. If it's withdrawal, I'm getting it from this one. And similarly, we'll need to determine the button as well, which one is being clicked. So so what text box as text box, because it's Visual Basic, so text box is nothing but an object, so we can work with that. And I will do dim add or take as integer and initialize it to 0. This is gonna determine whether we are going to add money for the deposit or take money for the withdrawal. So if sender is an object over here, that's one of the arguments. So if sender is button deposit, then the trans type equals deposit, the trans name equals deposit, and because this is just the deposit or withdrawal, over here the names will be transfer from. It wouldn't be deposit or withdrawal, it would be transfer from, and the type would be deposit or withdrawal. But in this case it's the same for both deposit or withdrawal. The type and name are the same. And what text box equals, well, if it's a deposit, that we are taking the deposit text box into consideration. That's where our number that we are looking for to deposit is. And we can do else trans type equals withdrawal, the trans name equals withdrawal, and what text box equals txt withdrawal. But if it's a withdrawal, remember we have the add or take. by default is 1. We assume it's a deposit, but if it's a withdrawal, we need to make it the opposite. We have to make it -1. So add or take equals -1. That way we'll know that we are withdrawing. Because what we basically are going to be doing, if I put 200 over here and click deposit, I know I'm depositing 200, so I will add it to it. But for withdrawal, if I write 200, if I click withdrawal button, I need to make it to a minus. So add or take, I will simply multiply the amount by add or take. So if it's 1, 200 times 1 is still just 200, but 200 times -1 is -200, so I will be automatically withdrawing from the amount, from the balance. So that's determining what button was clicked. And now we need to go back to our transactions and create the transactions that take care of you know, depositing and withdrawing. So first let's do something like public function, and I'll call it try transaction. This one will validate whether we can actually perform the transaction or not. There might be something wrong with the data already, so it will take the what text box, so we know where the data is. So as text box, and it will need the add or take. I'll call it as integer. I'll just keep the same name, but these are obviously arguments. And we will do a count. We will pass it to it, and this function will return double. What it's gonna return is basically the amount that is being deposited or withdrawn, or we'll try to do it. So dim trans amount as double, and over here I'll do dim deposit as boolean, and basically it will equal to, if the add or take is greater than 0, in other words if it's 1, then it's a deposit. If it's -1, then it's a withdrawal. So we will do if add or take is greater than 0, then return true, otherwise return false. So basically if adding money, we have a deposit, otherwise we have withdrawal. Okay, so that's good. And the next thing we can do, oops, okay, so the next thing we can do is go like, we need to try to parse the number. We have to make sure that the user didn't enter a string, that he actually entered a number. So if double dot try parse what text box, if that whatever is in that text box parses, too many brackets, what text box, then just assign it to a trans amount. So if this returns true, then everything is okay, and our trans amount is holding the value from the correct text box. And text box dot text, of course. So if the value is okay in the text box, again assign it to trans amount, and this passes and we can keep going. So if the double passes, Then now we have to check the balance. We have to, if the amount was correct, we have to try to perform the transaction in the account check balance. We have to make sure that even though it's a number, we still have to make sure that it's not, for example, 0, or if it's a withdrawal, that there's no insufficient funds. So we will call that method. So if account dot check account balance. Remember, all these are returning a true or false, whether they pass or not. So that's why we are doing the if statement. If this returns true, but we have to pass the parameters to it. So our trans amount is one of the parameter, and deposit is the other, which we checked here. So if it's a deposit, it's passes true, it goes over here, because what it's checking is whether it's deposit over here. So if it is, it goes over here and checks if the number is greater than 0. But if it's a deposit, it doesn't check this, because we don't need to check whether it's insufficient funds. But if it's not deposit, then it goes and it also checks the insufficient funds. So if this is true, then we have all good. So we can finally add the balance. Our account balance plus equals the trans amount multiplied by the add or take. So remember, if add is -1, then the trans amount will be negative. So adding negative number will basically be a subtraction, right? So and if it's a deposit, then add or take is 1. So the amount will stay the same. Anything multiplied by 1 stays the same, and we'll just add that number to it, to the account balance. And at this point, everything checked out, all the numbers, we can commit the transaction. So if we can write it down, is transaction committed. I'll just call it committed. This is a method that I don't have yet. I will create it. This transaction committed. Hold on a second. I just probably misspelled it. Transaction committed. Yeah, I misspelled it. So it's a property if transaction committed now equals true. Remember in the previous video, this is how will be false if there were problems with the numbers, like if a user entered the wrong number or insufficient funds, and then the events would be risen, or in this case, when we come to this line and this all passes, all these checks, then we can set it to true. Everything checked out, we can write the file. So that's that. That's our end if, except over here, if this doesn't check out, like if the first thing doesn't check out, if it's not a double, the user entered a string or something, so we will simply do else message box something like invalid input, and over here we will return false. So this function will return false if this doesn't check out, and if it does, it can return the transaction amount. So return trans amount. There you go. You could also, well, this one technically this is returning a double, so but if it comes over here and it returns false, it doesn't go any further than that, so we will simply show the invalid input, and basically it's like the exit sub kind of thing, or exit function. So that's that. So let me see, if I go to my form now, over here after I deposit the money, I can I can figure out the transaction amount that I have. So the trans amount equals, and I have a, remember I already created an object transaction with the default constructor with no parameters, so I can just use it and assign values to the properties directly. So our transaction, oops, not that many, transaction dot, and we will call that try transaction that we just created, and we will pass, it's asking for the text box that it takes data from. So what text box? It asks for the add or take, we will pass that, and it asking for the account. So that's our which, do we have an account? We don't have an account. Actually, you know what, one thing I'll be using probably a lot is the account. Which one is being actually used? Is it checking or is it savings? So I'm going to create a sub. Let me just create it right here. Actually, private, it's gonna be a function because it's gonna return what account I'm actually using. I'll just call it account used as account. It returns the account that is being used. So if our check account mode is true, then we know it's a deposit, right? So this is a deposit, so we will return the checking account. That's the object that we created over here, checking account. And if this is not true, then we will simply return the savings account. So now I know which one, which account is used simply based on the account check mode. So if I come over here, I will simply call the account used because that returns the account, and I can pass it to the transaction.try transaction. So that's that, and we'll take care of that. And so next I'm going back to our transaction. So I have the try transaction. Now I can assign the data. This is simply verified the data, made sure that they're correct. Now I can assign the data. So I will do public sub create transaction, and I will pass the trans name, I guess, to it. The trans name as string, trans type as string, trans amount as double, and the account. Oh, I always need the account, so account as account. So that's my sub, and I'm going to create trans as transaction, and over here simply if a transaction was committed, then everything checked out, and we can go and we can assign the values. So if is transaction committed, if it's true, then it's all okay. We can do transaction date equals today's date, date time dot today dot date. Our transaction name equal the name, I'm sorry, that's the transaction name, there you go, equals the trans name that we are passing to the to this method. our transaction amount equals trans amount. Our transaction, and it's the transaction type, equals true or false, but we want to actually display deposit or false. So once again, I'm gonna do the ternary operator if trans type equals deposit, except this one's reversed, of course, because this one's a data that's going to be written into the file, and the file only has true or false. It doesn't have deposit or withdrawal as the type. So if this is deposit, then true, otherwise we will assign it false. Again, all of this is data that's going to be written to the file. That's why we are converting it back to a true or false. And that's really all. So but one thing I need, I have the data, so now I have to write the data. So I'm going to call a sub that I'm going to create right away. So this is transaction, commit transaction. I'll just pass the account to it, and if I go over here, I will do private. It can be private because it's gonna be called only from here. Sub commit transaction, and I will pass the account to it as account, I guess. I think maybe I misspelled it. Hold on a second. Oh, that's better. Alright, so let's write the file. So I'll just use W to write as stream writer equals file dot, and we just appending one line at a time. So append text account, too many, account name, so account name, and the account we're getting obviously from the argument that we are passing to this create transaction, that at the end calls this commit transaction and passes the account to it. So we're gonna do the right line, and we are writing this in the order. So the first thing was the date, transaction date. Now we have to append the comma and transaction name, and we append the comma, and then we will do the transaction, I think it was amount, and yeah, it was amount, again comma, and finally for the file we will write the transaction type dot to string, because we have a true or false, but we want to actually write true or false. We want to spell it out. So that's our file all written out in the and now we have to close it after the end, and at this point we can raise the event transaction committed, which I will raise in the form. Let me do it right now. In the form, I'm gonna do the transaction event, transaction committed event, and that's gonna be something like sub. I will just do commit transaction handles the transaction dot transaction. Stupid IntelliSense doesn't work. And transaction committed. Now let me just get this transaction committed. I'll copy paste it and over here. Transaction committed. What's not working now? And that's because when I go back to my transactions, I'm creating the transaction logic over here, which is fine, but I forgot actually to do the public event. Let me just copy paste it. I have to first declare it over here. There you go. So I have the raising event. This is the event, and over here in the form I am handling that event over here for this transaction object that I created. Okay, so that will work now, hopefully. So first thing, transaction dot is transaction committed. Yes, it's true. So I'll just set it. In fact, I don't think I need to. Actually, I do. Remember, this transaction object did not have any parameters. We are assigning values to each of those properties directly. So we are transaction is committed equals true. And now we need to display, something like transaction has been added or something like that, and reread the files. Once it is done, we need to read the files so the new transaction is displayed as well. So let me do a little commenting. So when you download the code, so you know what was actually going on. So when transfer is performed, two operations take place. This is for the like, remember when I was telling you about the transfer? Oh, did I say transaction? I mean, yeah, the transfer is performed, because this is going to be handling all of them. This is gonna be handling deposit, withdrawal, transfer, and sign check. And these are all, even a sign check will be the same. It's just a withdrawal from checking account. Savings account doesn't even have checks. But this one is different. Like I said before, when you transfer from checking to savings, you are changing both accounts. So it's different. For deposit and withdrawal and sign check, you only change in one account at a time. So two operations take place when it's a transfer from one account to another. So withdrawal from the account is the first thing, and deposit to the other account. So if I leave it unchecked, if I just keep going and using the same thing for this as I'm using for deposit and withdrawal, I will have it double, because again, two operations take place. So every message will be displayed double, one for check-in, one for the savings, and the transactions would be double as well. I would have two lines of the same transaction, one for check-in and one for savings. So to avoid that, I'm going to actually check whether that particular button was clicked. And if you remember, I have a transfer flag as boolean. I had it set to false, and it says if transfer is clicked, special conditions apply, and these are the special conditions. So to avoid duplicate messages and changing grid, and by that what I mean, after, remember, we read the files after each transaction, and since we have to do two transactions, if we are in check-in, it performs the transaction from check-in and then it goes to savings, and it would actually display the savings over here in the grid view, because it displays the latest that we are asking to display. So transfer flag. So to avoid duplicate messages and changing grid, transfer flag is used to toggle it. On and off as needed. So basically the logic is very simple. If not transfer flag, then we can perform this. We can show the message, show it's a message box, sorry, message box dot show, and we will do transaction has been added. So that's the first thing we'll display, and then we will go to our transaction and read the files and update the grid. So transaction dot, see, remember these ones were shared, so we don't have to instantiate the object. So transaction read transaction files, and what account? Well, the account used. That's the method that we created up here that determines based on the account mode what account is being used. And finally we can do the presentation dot change forms, or change form to account used. Again, we need to pass that, and that will simply update the change forms. The grid view, it will refresh the form and display the grid view. That's what I mean, that if it's the account, it will do it for a check-in, and immediately it will do it for the savings. If it's the transfer, it will do it for check-in and then for the savings as well, and because it will just go through it twice for each account, because we have two transactions going on. So that's the special conditions for transfer. And when I'm already here making these events, the account changed and the amount less than 0, we can probably do those subs as well, and the insufficient amount as well, of course. So yeah, let's do those events. So sub insufficient funds handles the check-in account that what is going on here? Let me just, okay, so let's try again. Sub insufficient funds, this one will handles the check-in account that insufficient funds. Oh, you know what, I think I didn't do those events yet, did I? Oh, I'm writing it in account. I didn't mean that. I already have that. I knew I have it. It's right here, but the insufficient funds, it's in the forms. That's what I needed. So sub insufficient funds, and it will also handle the savings account that insufficient funds events, because that is the same event for both, for the form. So what is the problem here? Cannot resolve SV account. Ah, I misspelled that. It's supposed to be SV instead of SC. Why didn't you say anything? Alright, so savings, SV, not SC. Alright, so that's my insufficient funds, and in it basically if insufficient funds, set the committed flag to false. So that's because we cannot perform the operation. So our transaction that is transaction committed equals false. And we can display a message, something like in a message box, something like insufficient funds for this transaction. Alright, well, that's enough for this video, and in the next video I will finish this whole thing finally. So stick around and I will see you in the next video. Take care.